Hey, Voodoo Power listeners. Before we start the show, let me tell you about Strength Coach Pro. Strength Coach Pro is the ultimate coaching companion for passionate strength coaches. Strength Coach Pro is a powerful platform allowing coaches to sequence programs for an entire year, ensuring athletes stay on track. It features a simple drag and drop design for program building. It's easy and efficient, allowing for customized workouts. Another great feature of Strength Coach Pro is the real-time leaderboard feedback. Athletes love competition, creating a fun, engaged, and motivated environment where they can thrive. Strength Coach Pro is trusted by coaches at all levels, from professional to D1, high school, and professional trainers looking for an easy way to streamline programming needs. Whether working with 10 clients or 1,000 athletes, there are no limits to the support of this program. In addition, there's a 14-day trial for coaches where they can explore the platform for themselves. At just $50 a month or $500 a year, the value is unbeatable. Please don't miss your opportunity. Coaches can reach out to Strength Coach Pro for a demo today. Let them work to save you time and elevate your coaching. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast. Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Mike Gattone. Coach Gattone is USA Weightlifting Senior Director of Sports Performance. He has held the titles of Coach, Official, USA Weightlifting and International Weightlifting Federation Board Member, National and International Meet Director. Gattone started his career as a graduate assistant for strength at the University of Kansas. After KU, Coach Gattone was offered a position at Great Plains Sports Science Training Center, a nonprofit gym working with at-risk youth teaching Olympic sports. While there, he hosted the 1991 Junior National Championships, the 1992 Olympic Trials, and the 1993 Senior National Championships. Because of his demonstrated experience directing meets, he was brought in as the competition director for the 1996 Atlanta Olympic Games. After the Games, Gattone started working for Chicago Bulls as an assistant strength coach under Al Vermeil. In the late 2001, he accepted a position with the U.S. Olympic Committee in Colorado Springs as manager of coaching programs. After 2 years, he went back to Chicago and opened his own gym for sports performance, including weightlifting. Gattone added on a role as high performance and coaching education director for USA Weightlifting. In his tenure, he ran the 2007 U.S. Nationals and the 2009 Pan American Championships in Chicago. Gattone became a manager of sports intelligence for Gatorade before returning to USA Weightlifting. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. I appreciate you asking me to be here, and it's an honor. Thank you. Thanks for that intro, too. I'm old, brother.
Well, I had to reduce that dramatically because your resume is just so great that I tried to pick out the high points and we'll roll from there.
Thank you so much.
Well, this week was probably a little challenging for you, so I appreciate you making time. You had some work done on your hip, so hopefully
work done on my hip. There's my buddy, the ice pack, sitting on my hip, and yeah, I had a hip replacement on the left side, and it went well, I think, and they feel like I'm on or a little ahead of schedule. So I'm going to be home next week still. And then the week after, I'm planning to travel. We have a camp with the best level athletes we have, male and female, in the U.S. at the Olympic Training Center. And I organized the camp, and I told the athletes it's a mandatory camp too. So I'm like, how can I not be there? So I'll make it.
Well, talking about the best Olympic lifters in the country, I think, through the last Olympics, we're starting to see a resurgence in Olympic weightlifting in the country. What's it going to take to bring that to the forefront and maybe start taking some of these golds from the Eastern European countries?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you first, I love stats, and I mean, since I should have probably printed my stat sheet, but since 2017, right? So we work in quads in the Olympic movement. So Rio Olympics 2016, and then we started the Tokyo quad, and even though it was waylaid by COVID, but in 2017, since 2017, USA weightlifting athletes have won medals in every senior world championship since 2017 through 2024. You would have to go back prior, to 2016, a little ways for senior world medals. Now it's regular. It's every year. We've done it. Knock on wood. We haven't been skunked in 7 years. Tokyo Olympics, 2 medals, 1 silver from Kate Biber, and one bronze from Sarah Robles, and now, a gold and a bronze in Paris. So 4 Olympic medals. And again, you have to go back to, Sarah won a medal in 2016. And then prior to that, it's 2000 for Tara Knott, the athlete I coached. And then prior to that, for a man, 1984 Los Angeles. So, and then Hampton came around. So, it's a fair and valid question, but we did take a gold. We took a gold from China at this Olympics, in a sense, because they chose not to enter that weight category. So that was a tremendous win for us. I think the rise of weightlifting, you didn't ask me that question. We can get into it. There's a lot of variables, and but certainly, yes, we've been on the ascent. I think you'd be surprised now, like nations that want to speak to us about how we're operating, because we are unconventional. Like, we're not a classic, Eastern Bloc nationalized training center. Every athlete comes from all their little cities and villages and lives at one training center and does the same programming and all those classic things you would see. And a lot of countries that are, especially Western nations, European nations, and they want to know how we're doing it, because they're dealing with some of the same issues that we have.
Yeah, if this is an outside in view, but some of your countries like China or whatever, there's a lot of benefit for being an Olympic weightlifter there and what 100%. Comes with it. Here we have football, we have basketball. They pay a lot of money.
Yes,
you're fighting.
You're dead on.
Yes, you're fighting money.
You're dead on. I'll steal a line from my favorite TV shows, The Sopranos. It's apples and bowling balls, right? Like, for China and the United States, they start athlete identification in grammar school. They offer this opportunity to the young people in a giant country where, opportunities may not be as clear cut as they are potentially in the United States. They tend to go to areas, maybe more rural areas, where this is a chance for you to live at a training center, have these meals, travel internationally. So starting super early, identifying kids. We don't have any of that. We don't have any of that. So you're right. It's a completely different thing. I mean, we have 27,000 approximately members in USA Weightlifting, but I mean, that counts me, every official, every coach. So, keep narrowing that down to what the gene pool is of like elite athletes in that, versus a nation, like China. They were, 100,000 weightlifters. I don't know how many are in the country, but and they're nobody like here, weightlifting, just like triathlon or archery or shooting or even swimming. There's master's levels. There's people who do this for fun and enjoyment. That don't happen in China. Like, you're national level or you go to work. That's it. So it's it's like I said, you can't make a comparison us and them.
In there, you talked about all the members of USA Weightlifting, and a great amount of them are coaches. They're maybe not lifting, they're teaching athletes to lift. So how do you stay on top of the content where you guys are pushing out great content that are keeping coaches up to date as you get it and you view it as important?
Yeah, it is difficult, because again, we talked about my friend Dane, or it's United States. Everybody can make a platform and push out content, and some people do a damn good job of it. So I'm not even sure USA Weightlifting is necessarily somebody's first stop to look for content. You would like it to be, but I'm not necessarily sure it is. Our coaching certifications have definitely helped, through the years. Thousands of people have got the level 1 and the level 2. I mean, if you want to coach a weightlifter in the United States, i.e. go to a national competition, you got to have a certification to do that. that's been really helpful. And then I think the carryover, I know we're going to talk about that, of the Olympic movements, I'm going to say the weightlifting movements to sports performance has been, I think that's a dramatic variable for us, right? Because, you may not be a competitive weightlifter in high school, and we do have a lot of competitive weightlifters in high school, by the way, but you may be a kid doing cleans and power snatches and front squats with a really good strength and conditioning coach, and so you've got some background should you decide to get into the competition. I mean, it's exactly what I mean. That's what happened to me. We're talking 40 years ago, but I thought I was trying to follow Mac Wilkins and Al Furbuck. Those were my idols. We're talking late 70s, and I wasn't even that good of a thrower, but I had their pictures somehow. Guys like that just, that obsessed me. So, I would see a printed program, how the champions train, and what's a power clean? What's a power snatch? So I tried to learn, and, like, okay, you got to squat, you got to snatch and clean and do these big movements, get my hands on Bill Starr's book, The Strongest Shall Survive. And so my whole background getting into the sport was from strength and conditioning for another sport, really. I did compete in 1980 in high school. I went to the Illinois State Championship, but I'm going off topic. I know you asked about content, but I'm saying I'll go back, I guess, to tie a bow on that. That's related because the amount of people that are saying, I want to know about weightlifting, the sport, and the amount of people who want to say, I want to know about weightlifting, the training methods, overlap nicely for us. So that really helps us with numbers.
And as I've dug into this more and more, I'm not a huge Olympic lift guy.
You're going to be after this. I'm getting in the car and driving to Kansas City, man.
And you never know. You keep your options open, right? But in saying that, it seems like looking at it, track and Olympic lifting are tied at the hip, and a lot of really strong throwers end up becoming really great weightlifters. So Olympic weightlifting will always stay relevant as long as track is relevant in this country.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, there's tons of athletes across sports that utilize some aspects of Olympic weightlifting in training. And I mean, I don't want to start jumping ahead, but I mean, maybe it's a good starting place for us, because you mentioned I worked for Coach Vermeil, and just to back up for a second, I mean, in the 80s and, mid 80s, late 80s, early 90s, when I was hired at KU because I came from weightlifting. The guy who was looking for the GA literally advertising USA Weightlifting magazine. He wanted somebody who could teach the lifts. Back then, you were like a Nautilus guy. You were a one set of failure on machines, or you were an Olympic weightlifting guy, which, you have some of that now, and it's just a funny, laughable dichotomy, isn't it? Like, you're supposed to be a professional with a toolbox full of tools, and you pick the right tool for the right job. So working for Coach Vermeil, though, really gave me a very objective sense of thinking about why I would have an athlete do a clean variation or a snatch variation. And you're right. I mean, that sense can be applied straight up to an individual sport like track and field. Track and field and weightlifting have a lot of commonalities, particularly the explosive, short sprints and throws. But even if you think about like peaking, right? I mean, in weightlifting, I can sit down at the beginning of the year and tell my athlete, we're going to peak hard for these two events. Can't really do that in a team sport. It's very difficult. In fact, sometimes they're deconditioned by the end of the season, So I just gave a talk to the Illinois High School Strength and Conditioning, or it was a National High School Strength and Conditioning Coach Association, the Illinois variation. And, the talk was about Olympic lifting for athletic development. And I kind of insisted that was the title because, that's your job as a strength and conditioning coach, athletic development. You have to remember you're not maybe you are the defensive line coach. Maybe you are the tennis coach. Maybe you are a lacrosse coach. But in the weight room, you got all the athletes for every sport. So your job is not to tie a rubber band on a hockey stick and say, this is sport-specific training. Your job is to develop an athlete. Okay. So you look at pyramid, like Coach Vermeil's pyramid of development, right? The bottom of the pyramid, the base for everything is, work conditioning, mobility, body composition, strength to body weight ratio, this type of thing. Okay. These should be objectively measurable, and you should be able to say, okay, an athlete's ready to move to the next level of the pyramid. What's the next level of the pyramid? Well, it's just gross base strength, like get them stronger. Can the kid push or pull a percentage of their body weight? Can comment it to their gender, can comment it to their age, can comment it to what they're going to experience on the field. Okay, what goes above that? Strength, speed. Okay, and again, whatever sport you're going to be in, even if it's maybe an endurance sport, you got some aspect of that. Okay, so you're telling me you want me to develop an athlete. Okay. And I look and I go, okay, well, it's easy to tick the box on the strength speed side. Okay. Ground reaction force, rate of force development, speed, power. I can go all day with anybody on Olympic lifts with that. Okay. But that puts me into a box where somebody can say, how come I can't do X? So let me reverse back down the pyramid. Okay. If I can rack a bar and sit into a good front squat position, I guarantee you that's a healthier, more athletically developed athlete than one who can't do that. Okay. So that's a good tool. I get a 2-for-1. We are doing a bunch of work with our athletes at Marquette University on biomechanics. And I've been actually absolutely blown away by the ground reaction force experienced by an athlete when they catch a snatch or a clean. I notice in the work capacity phase, people are stepping off boxes and learning how to land and stuff like that. Okay, well, how do I develop that even more? Frick, have them catch their body weight on a clean with a good position or a snatch. So I start to look at it like when I'm trying to tick these boxes on athletic development, being able to demonstrate to me that I could put a bar on the floor, get into a good start position. I got mobile ankles. I got good mobile hips. I got a T-spine that extends. Okay. I can lift the bar off the floor to my hips. We see that there's a tremendous amount of force in newtons required to do that because the body at rest wants to stay at rest. I'm ticking off strength. Then I can get here and I can do an explosive vertical jump. I'm definitely ticking off speed and power. Then I can catch this thing. And because I did a good job as a strength coach at the lower levels and I developed mobility and everything, I can receive that load. Wow. When my kid lands from jumping 10 feet in the air to spike a volleyball, they're going to be ready for that. So to me, these are extremely powerful, time-efficient tools in my toolbox for athletic development, period. And I'm always going to look at it that way, and no one's ever going to be able to talk me out of that. And some of that's from experience and some of that's from science, So, but also I want people to remember, like I'm talking about following a pyramid, if you have a kid do a power clean and they can't do a good front squat and they get injured in their wrists, that's not the power clean's fault. That's your fault as a coach. Same thing if you have them running 15 miles an hour on a high-speed treadmill and they can't do a toe touch as a 10-year-old. Like, nobody yells at you for that. Nobody says, oh, don't do speed work. Come on, dude. Like, let's take a breath. Let's take a breath and think about something, Coach, we've said that for years. Like, an incoming freshman, boy or girl, do you have on the wall, some coaches do, some coaches don't, I'm not saying you specifically, but do you have a standard of, say, good neutral spine, moving my shoulder blade, push-ups they should do before you lay them on a bench press? I bet in 95% of the school around the nation, they don't. But nobody really is going to go, don't be a bench press guy, you know? So
I can understand that. I feel the same about the dead.
you wound me up, buddy. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Hey, that's why you're on here. I want your opinion. I don't want to give you mine. I want to hear yours. But the deadlift's a lot the same way. It gets a bad rap. It's not a bad movement, but all the things that have to go into it have to be built.
Coach, I'm sitting here joking, right, with ice on my. I'm not joking. I do have ice on my hip. I had but so I'm 61. I mean, I rucked 3 miles with a 40-pound pack the morning before I got hip surgery. I'm not saying I'm like a stellar in shape guy, but I've kept my fitness pretty well. I firmly believe that I was not born with the hip structure to be a good squatter. What makes me think that? I know I had a crappy bottom position in the snatch and the clean. If you see pictures of me, even when I was halfway decent lifter, I looked like I was power snatching. I always had trouble as a kid putting the bar on the floor and feeling comfortable. And I can't tell you how many times through my strength career, I hurt my back in the bottom of a back squat. Okay. To this day, I'm the man who just went through a surgery you could die from, basically. I'm not going to say pulling off the floor or back squatting are bad exercises. What I'm going to say is I wish in the 70s and 80s, when I was jumping into this, there was a little more information on that side, how to assess somebody, how to maybe safely find a variation. I think I could have become a better squatter with more ankle mobility and more hip internal rotation work, but nobody was there to really teach me that, So I hope to get back to, do my goblet squats on a ramp. I'm sure I will. I believe a human being needs to squat and squat deep, and a human being needs to be able to hinge and lift something off the floor. I mean, again, that's athletic development. That's all you can do. That's all you can do unless your job, is to be on the field, teach them how to throw a lacrosse ball. Because, it's if you look back at the old Soviet model, special strength versus general strength. Strength and conditioning coaches, for the most part, were general strength developers, right? I mean, you do some special strength training, but, people get really stuck in the weeds with that. Like, I don't know if a kid is really passed by the general strength or they should do the special strength. And in this day and age, look at what an NFL, player does, or an MLB baseball player or coach. They're doing special strength all the freaking time. They need the general strength. They don't need to mimic the sport more. They don't. They need to do human movements well and loaded so they can do the sport better and let their sport coaches get them good at it. So
you bring up an interesting point, and we're getting there with the youth, that they're becoming very specialized very quickly. And I've noticed with the younger generation, when they come in the gym, let's say you ask them to do a squat, whether it be a goblet, whether it be a front, whether it be a back squat, you take a bilateral movement and they want to do it unilaterally. They have a dominant leg that they jump off of, they throw off of, and they will shift the weight to that leg to squat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you got to do so much general work just to get them back so you can do specific work that,
100% agree with you.
I think that bullet lasts a long time if you start getting into some Bondarchuk ideas where, if general strength's working and it's showing up on the field, why are you running away from it to chase something that you don't need?
100%. I remember when I had my sports performance business, a kid, I mean, there's a million, everyone has a million stories like this, but this one stood out a lot because I did my evaluation, vertical jump on a mat. We had a timing system, blah, blah, blah. We ran a 20, a game of split but I did a movement screen, and this kid was I won't want to say one of the tighter kids because you have a million of them. Most freshmen are like that. But he was a real rock. The kid could hardly do anything. So, the dad was waiting for me, and he kept going on and on about it. He needs to be faster, I'm like, gotcha, Dad. So for 4 weeks of work capacity phase, we don't go past like running drills, but everything else is, mobility and general strength. And then, I retest the kid and he takes like whatever, 0.3 of a second or 0.2 of a second off his 20, something very measurable, put some inches on his vertical jump and down. It's like, all right, and you don't want to get into this conversation like we're having where you're trying to explain to them, especially because, you need those people to pay you at times. And, they see the sexiness of being faster on the field, telling them, I'm going to get them a better Thomas evaluation because their hip flex really tight. It doesn't sell as well. But I'll say this, you give me an athlete long enough, I all of those other things, like, yeah, I'm going to get to a point of, fast, full out sprinting, running with sleds. I had so many kids that trained with me from 8th grade to senior year. We probably had a dozen that power clean 300 pounds from the floor, many different sports. It's not that big of a deal, but not to take that away from a kid, but I'm saying, like, it just takes time. And it's not like, oh, it's awesome, the kid's a 300-pound power cleaner. What's awesome is that now a high school kid who's going to be playing football against another high school kid who can't clean 300 pounds, can't do it in good positions, can't move it fast enough, can't rack it, yada, yada. Who you think is going to be better on the field? It's not maybe not even so much because it's the 300-pound clean, but the demonstration, the ability to be able to do that is what you can say as a strength and conditioning coach. Damn, I actually did a good job on athletic development.
Yes, the muscle coordination is there to be athletic.
All of it.
So I have throwers, and they were kind of pushing. A lot of them are going to go on to school, and so they were kind of pushing to get into Olympic movements. I'm not awesome at it, so I didn't want to outrun my coaching. So we've kind of worked on the high pulls and different things like that. Now, the one thing I have seen with this, and I probably wouldn't have said this a few years ago, but the calf development has been great, and it seems to really have helped the vertical jumps.
Well, I mean, proper weightlifting. First of all, like, I'm an old guy, and I started off as a history major. By the way, I love history. And, this sport through 1968, I think it was, had a rule that you couldn't touch your body when you lifted the bar from the floor. You had to lift the bar from the floor to the appropriate receiving position without touching any part of your body. This is why it's called a clean. You had to bring it cleanly to your shoulders, or snatch, because you put it on the floor and snatched it all the way over your head. So, okay, in the 60s, they changed the rule. Hey, you can touch your legs, you can touch your body. If the sport changed dramatically, the look of the athletes, the amount of weight that went up, the Soviets came up like saying, no, weightlifting is gymnastics with a barbell. Okay. So to answer your question, I think first understanding proper weightlifting mechanics and the importance of touching a power position where you put an impulse against the floor, make the implement, it's just like a shot, just like a discus, maybe even like a basketball jumping against the floor. You're making an implement go on its own for a certain amount of time so that you can receive it in my sport and track just to keep it going, right? So understanding how to use your legs to impulse this weight, that's the first key. And that, you can do that. You can start teaching that with a pull, with a high pull, with a muscle snatch. Will Fleming talks a lot about doing it with a muscle snatch. There's ways for sure. But, I would encourage any throws coach to minimally get your guys, when I mean guys and girls, doing a power clean and a power snatch from the power position, like the top of the thighs. If even I could live with somebody saying, well, we're not going any further than that. I can live with that, coach. But I think understanding what it's really like to punch the ground at that position and make that thing jump on its own for a second is the magic, at least in the speed strength aspect of Olympic lifting. I can just, we're doing all these biomechanics tests that I told you about, and an interesting aspect that I started seeing, is so our biomechanists will basically analyze a lift and give a trace of force and a trace of bar velocity kind of overlaid. So you get force on the bottom, bar velocity at top. And I started to notice, I'm like, damn, it's really interesting. Highest bar velocity comes when a couple milliseconds after highest force application, indicating to me that you're punching against a fixed surface to make an implement speed up. Oh, boy, I do that, the power at the toe board and the shot, don't I? Oh, yeah, I do that when I get to the end of the discus. I do that when I hit some poor slob across the line for me efficiently, That's sports. So that's probably one of the magic things about it to me, because you could slowly progress the load of which you're trying to insert or make move with maximal velocity and getting as much height as you can. And I mean, it's very measurable. It's very objective. And, and you can see when you've having success with it, like you said.
Now, from that, we've touched on it just a little bit here as we've been talking, but the importance of dynamic stability in athletics. With these movements, you're catching, there's a lot of,
my goodness.
There's so much that at a high speed that you have to be able to learn to stabilize your body in very good positions. How much has Olympic weightlifting helped athletes with that?
Well, again, I keep coming back because I like to be objective and not just say it's my opinion, right? I recently was just looking at a slide of one of our athletes that was one of Dane's athletes, was, in the running for the Paris Games all the way almost to the end. And she's cleaning. So she weighs about 50 kilos in that video, and she's cleaning probably 100 kilos, right? And so she has to apply, I don't have the slide in front of me, but she's probably applying like 150% of the barbell force to the ground to make it jump to the height of the catch. Okay, great. Then there's a big fall off, of course, of fork because they're moving under the bar. Then you see this spike, Steve, to like 2 or 2.5 times the force of the barbell that this athlete's receiving, and not even really thinking about it, just standing up. So you tell me, if you have a 110-pound girl that is able to absorb 200 plus kilos of force on their body while holding neutral joints, neutral posture, and being able to stand right back up. Seems to me like that's a pretty efficient way to train eccentric loading, in a rapid sense versus like, hey, let's step off a box and catch. Of course, those things are progressions, but we don't have a lot of time in this field either, right? And so I want to try to do things with 2-for-1s or 3-for-1s if I can. So you sure tick that off when you catch a weight. And I would say don't play on the snatch. Learn how to do it well, because you're adding in shoulder stability. And when you think, I was just talking to friend Rob Panarello, who's just, I think, one of the best PTs in the world. And he was medical director for Carolina Panthers and worked with the Giants. And he's doing some research on pitching. And he was just telling me about application of the split jerk to slowing down the shoulder in pitching. And I'm like, makes tons of sense to me. Coach Vermeil called catching the weight triple flexion. So you have triple extension, then you have triple flexion. That's a way to look at it. You can think of like, a lot of people do offset load carries and things like that, which are great for like core development. But, you can catch a weight in a couple milliseconds. So think about the bracing, the dynamism, that like to catch your body and the weight and stop. Pretty awesome. Pretty good tool.
I'm a fan of high speed eccentrics, and it seems like if you're slow in your eccentrics, you're gonna have trouble once you ride the weight down. You're gonna have trouble getting it up if you don't get down there, get set, and get back up. I mean, I think that could possibly carry over to sport, maybe more so than anything, is the speed of the eccentrics. I don't know what objectionable evidence you have for that, but I'd be interested in hearing it.
Well, no, I would agree with you because, I mean, how many kids a year get the non-contact ACLs, for example? And, that happens mostly or many times when they're striking, having to eccentrically control the joint and then maybe change direction or come up over that knee to sprint forward or react to another player on the field, and boom. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of scientific data, but I would just say, experientially, that's a weak athlete. So, doing eccentric strength training, learning how to catch a snatch, catch a clean, and stop and control, I think are all tremendous parts of that.
Now, I did have that question in here that you talked about with Vermeil, triple flexion to triple extension. And we always talk triple extension, but what is the importance of triple flexion?
Well, I think it's what we just talked about, so kind of 2-for-1s or 3-for-1s, right? Like if you step off a box and do a landing mechanic, that's awesome. You're loading the kid through the ankle, through the knee, through the hip. If you catch a clean, now you're adding in, they got to stabilize through their midsection. They got to stabilize through the thoracic segments. So that's all it is. I mean, it's the ability, we know that, especially moving rapidly into an eccentric, the force of the load, goes up exponentially. So, you're preparing an athlete by putting more external weight in their hand while you're doing that. So I think a kid, Heroes Demos that I work with in USA Weightlifting, really interesting when he and I wrote the learning steps of the current level 1. One of the things he insisted on was for beginners that every time you catch, I could hear him in his accent. He'd go, catch 1, 2, 3, bring the weight down. So they're not only developing eccentric strength and stability, but what that's really good for is making sure the athlete knows how to direct the load. That's how I like to look at it. Because a lot of time athletes get lost in the weeds. Like they think about a horizontal punch. Okay. If you punch a snatch or a clean horizontally, you can't freeze on the catch. You have to readjust. So it also teaches them to apply force vertically and then receive it vertically.
That is very interesting, the way you're going with that, because that's the first thing I noticed when you start working with kids is it takes a lot to get them vertical as opposed to horizontal just because they want to get the weight up quick. Well, that may not be the most efficient.
Yeah. I think, one thing I said in this last clinic I spoke at, we can't be afraid, and a lot of good strength coaches are, but we should be differentiating kids at the high school level based on certainly chronologic age, but don't forget training age and biologic age too. But, if I have a bunch of freshmen, the only things I would be objectifying with freshmen would be tests in the work capacity zone. So some kind of mobility test, some kind of functional fitness test. I don't care about how fast they run a mile, but can they do 800 med ball, circuit, an 800 rep med ball circuit? But I would be teaching them at that age the exercises that I want to build on when I finish a work capacity phase. And I'd be doing that all like group training, right? Like power position, hit, down, out, like 10 guys in a row, 20 guys in a row, because at that age, that's all it is. It's learning. And I would be treating back squats that way too, and front squats that way, honestly. because they're going to get a lot of bang for the buck by the other aspects of the work capacity phase. And I'm kind of going down that a little bit because I think you need to have that kind of mindset to be somebody who capitalizes on using Olympic weightlifting or, Stephen, any other complex exercise, because how many freshmen have you seen? Hey, we're doing squat testing today, and it's a quarter squat, So first of all, they're lifting way more than they can. And second of all, what does that mean? Like, what is that? That's a test of nothing. Me going into trigonometry final, which I would never get to, by the way. It's horrible at math, but going into trigonometry final and they hand me, I don't know, algebra 1. Okay, I could pass the algebra 1, but you're testing me on trigonometry. So why are you giving me a trigonometry test, So
very listening to you talk there, it's very Mr. Miyagi style. The set up an exercise that they don't even realize it's going to build into another.
Yeah, that's probably true. It's probably true, but trick them. Second defense. Oh no, it's sand the floor, right?
Sand the floor, paint the fence.
Yeah. I tried telling my kids because I saw that movie at University of Arizona in 1982 or 3 when it first came out, and that was a scene where the entire theater, I jumped up screaming. It was just like hair raising, so cool. You didn't expect it, but
I remember, back then a VCR cost. I don't even know what a VCR cost, but it was a lot of money. You used to be able to go to video. Yeah. You used to be able to go to the video store and rent a VCR and rent movies, and that's how I watched it.
Yeah, no doubt.
So we'll just keep going down the avenues we're going.
Yeah.
The importance of velocity in watts and how that carries over to athletic development.
Yeah.
We measure a lot of things. We measure meters per second. We're always looking at bar speed. But creating a little bit more complicated formula, getting the watts up there, how much better of an athlete are you going to have in the right movements with the higher wattage? Sure.
It's an objective measure, right? Like, hopefully one thing you can tell by talking to me is I like objectivism, like measure something for me. Like, because one of the things we can just get lost in and we all have, if you're a strength coach, weightlifting coach, track coach, you have got lost in the weeds where, I got to do this exercise. You have, like, if you're a liar, if you say you haven't, things look cool or you want to try it or, so you really need to, like the good book says, try to build your house on rock versus sand, right? So, okay, I know what my rock's going to be. Well, how can anybody argue that if you had a 150-pound girl and on some objectively measurable exercise or test, the kid at the beginning of the year with X load moved it fast enough to produce 1,500 watts of force. I'm just making up a number. And then at the end of the year, with more load, move it faster so that now they are producing 2,000 watts or 2,500 watts without changing exponentially. They're still, within a standard deviation of 150 pounds. Well, that's a pretty damn good objective measure, especially depends on the sport, especially. But I would argue any sport, but I mean, especially if that kid is in the majority of high school sports, swimming, diving, punching off the board, of course, volleyball, basketball, any of them. So, yeah, I mean, I would look at that as an objective measure. Not always easy to do, right? For us, with 100 kids in a high school weight room or not having, the tools to do, some type of diagnostics. But, I would say to me, if I'm looking on Coach Vermeil's pyramid, that comes right up above strength, is power. And that's one of the ways you measure power, by measuring power output, watts, power and watts.
The one thing I think would be really cool, and you have both parts of the formula you need. You have the velocity and you have the wattage. You could figure horsepower, and maybe that would transfer over better in people's minds if you could kind of see the horsepower being generated.
Yeah. Have you seen in the USA Weightlifting? This is one interesting thing, though. I just go back to weightlifting for a second, but here's why I'm going to throw this out, because let's say you don't really have a way to measure power. Like, give me a number in watts. I mean, here's a good way to measure it. There's a study that John Garhammer did in the 90s where he took 100-kilo men, so 220-kilo men, world records, those world records across the board on bench press, squat, and deadlift, and measured top output in watts. I don't know if it was top or it was watts for the whole movement. Okay, that I'd have to go back and look at. And then he did the same at the World Championships for the snatch and clean and jerk. Well, the top wattage power output on a world record bench was like, I think it was in the 400s. On a squat, it was like a little over 1,000, and same thing on a deadlift. On the clean, it was over 4,000 watts. And on the snatch, the same. And on the jerk, the same. So here again, let's talk about objectivity. Okay. The kid, when they get a concomitant good amount of strength, okay, and Coach Vermeil was awesome for this. Like, we would say, like, okay, a high school girl that's, she's a goalkeeper. She's a goalkeeper in soccer. If she can squat 150% of her body weight, we're talking a good, nice, deep, athletic squat. Okay, then you're starting to work on the power aspect. So now you can start to look at like percentage of squat that the kid can power clean. And I don't necessarily have to have a VBT unit on the end of the bar to give me an output in watts. It's really nice, but I don't have to have that, because I know, well, I checked off this kid on their strength and I'm not going to lose it. I'm going to maintain that. But now I'm trying to push up power. Oh, how am I going to push up power? Power clean more, because they have to get the weight high enough to catch it. That means it's moving damn fast. One time I was visiting Coach Ratcliffe, Jimmy Ratcliffe at University of Oregon, and we talked about measuring bar velocity and everything. And he goes, you know how I know if someone's moving a bar fast enough on a power snatch? Because they can catch it. And that's a damn good point. So you don't have to get real fancy, Steve. You can assume, without any type of diagnostics on the bar, if a kid, and within a standard deviation, 2%, 3% of body weight, their power clean or their power snatch continuously rises, 1,000%, the power output of that athlete is continuously rising. It has to, or they can't get the bar high enough to catch it. It's very simple. This is why Bill Starr said squat, bench, clean. It's not just because he was being a bumperhead. I mean, you can drop back and say, like, well, that's training the whole body, and it's training many aspects needed for athletic development, and athletic performance.
Right. And then if you put all of that together, you put your strength side together with your power side, then you've got a very conjugated way of building, and
100%.
Vermeil's pyramid 100%. Kind of at the same time.
100%. Yeah.
The one thing I will say is I feel like we develop kids well in how they look. I mean, people know they come here by the way they look.
Yeah.
We sent an athlete down to Missouri State. They do a lot of Olympic lifts, and she come back and her body composition was unbelievable. So whatever these lifts are doing, they are developing traps, erectors.
Sure.
I was actually shocked at how much her composition had changed.
Yeah. Well, work. If you're looking at the formula for measuring mechanical work, distance is a part of that. So if you're lifting a bar from low blocks to a catch position, it's a lot of work, right? If you do that for 3 reps, for example, or 4 reps, that's even more work. If you do that at a high rate of speed with a good weight, because you're learning to be more and more efficient, that's even more work. So, yeah, I agree. Like, rather than taking the time maybe to do some kind of, just long hypertrophy based training, you're not going to have that with a college athlete. So you need to get, again, these bang for the buck movements.
Well, Coach, I know you're sitting on ice, so I'll get ready to wrap
Yes.
this up, try to be respectful of how you feel.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This has been so fun.
But I'll kind of hit you with this last one here. I was able to get to know Itzvan Javorek, and I got to listen to him talk about how, they used to do things. He developed a grid wall so they could kind of see what was going on with the wall behind him. So you've been in this sport long enough to see the development of the grid wall to where we're at now with velocity tracking, E-nodes, all of those things. That's like going to the moon with what we have now.
Sure.
How much has that changed how we view lifting and how we teach it?
Steve, isn't it funny? Like, Ishban was a hero, friend of mine, so I learned so much from him. If you go to advanced athletic performance facilities around the country, what are some of the things you see? Make sure you do single leg movements. Well, the Soviet system, they were doing single leg movements in the 50s and 60s. Make sure you do bounding, plyometric type movement. That comes from the Soviet school. Jumping, using Olympic lifting, and a delineation of general strength versus specific strength. This stuff is 50 or 60 years old. So nothing's changed. Right? Just a realization that, hey, that's really good stuff. It's based in science. I'd say what has changed potentially is when you talk about something like, just using your eye in a grid wall versus, I don't know, there's computer diagnostics now, right, to measure joint angles and things like that. You probably get a chance to drill down a little more clinically in some things. That's where I think, depending on the level of the athlete, you can do some really good advanced work with, velocity based type unit for training or figuring out some formula to measure and track power. But I don't think we need to get into that stuff until an athlete checks off on all other kinds of things. I always would make this funny analogy. I have to have one food analogy, right? Like I have two kids that are grown, 30 and late 20 now, and you always remember like, hey, it's mommy's birthday. Kid wants a baked cake for mommy, So you buy a box of Betty Crocker cake mix and you have the child along with you carefully follow the cake mix, and put everything in a pan and you bake it. You know what it's going to taste like. It's going to be a pretty good solid chocolate cake, right? You'd make it for, whatever. Saturday night, you got to go to a potluck. Okay, I'll make the Betty Crocker cake. Okay. The base is done. It's good. Okay. So now the kids want to decorate. So, okay, decorate it. Well, that looks like a hot mess. Okay. But it doesn't matter. That was like fluff, right? If I'm serving it at a wedding, okay, I'm probably going to take it and have it decorated perfectly too. So what I'm trying to say is people need to use their eyes and their mind a little bit more. Coach Javorek and the Soviet era people, and a lot of American coaches too, were on to tremendously advanced training systems way back in the 60s and 70s. And we think because we have different technology or we can use bigger words or, we go to more certifications than them, that we're smarter. We're not smarter. Maybe we thought of some ways to objectify things a little bit more. But the more we think things change, the more we realize they're the same. The human body is still a human body, and there's basic, well-proven ways to develop that human body. And that's it. You can't really argue that.
No, we're standing on compounded knowledge.
That's right. We are, Coach, for sure.
Well, Coach, thank you very much for sitting down and doing this. I hope your recovery keeps going well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And
thank you.
It was a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I appreciate it too, Steve. Anybody, I love talking to people about training. You can find me on Instagram if you want to send a message or reach out. I encourage you to look at USA Weightlifting certifications if you're interested in taking your knowledge to another level on that. And if you're in the Chicago area and, you're around, shoot me a message. I'd be happy to, sit down and have a coffee or have you come out to watch my guys practice at night sometime too. So.
Well, that'd be great. I do get up to Chicago some, so I may take
All
you
right,
on it.
let's go. Come on up. Great to see you.
All right, Coach. Well, have a wonderful
see you.
evening.
My pleasure. You're welcome. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you very much.